Yay. Okay, they say it's better. We fixed it.
Brilliant, brilliant. Right, okay, so first of all, let's you all know, if you come here, you know who I am and what all my ridiculousness is and all my things I'm interested in and my, just what I generally twat on about. However, our lovely guest, you probably know her already because she's like superstar. But could you introduce yourself to us, please?
Oh, I wouldn't say superstar. Hi, I'm Pixie. I'm Proton Pixie. I do things with Technodad, and I've done things with Jack Manifold. I was doing stuff with Tommy in it last night. That was so fun. Yeah, I do. Uh, Suddenly I don't like. It's like when someone asks you what your favorite book is, and you're like, I surely know how to read. Um, yeah, so I do things and stuff. I'm a content manager on the internet. I started freelance and I am 19. I'm finishing university, so I did a lot of stuff by myself and learned a lot of things, and I guess that's why I'm here to talk about things and stuff.
And what you do? What are you doing at university?
I'm studying PR communications.
Ooh, brilliant, brilliant.
Yeah.
And you work with Technodad.
I do, yes.
You manage that stuff. You manage your stuff.
Yes, I manage his content and I help him make content and I also help manage his like schedule and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So
Oh, brilliant. Lovely. So, today we're talking about neurodiversity. So, before we get cracking, just thought maybe we'll just have a little sort of idea of what that means to us. Because it's going to, while there's like a general definition, it might mean something different to you than it means to me, and that's okay. So, I was looking at various definitions of it, and the idea is that um, atypical neurological development. I'm just using long words first, right? And then I'll talk normal. Atypical neurological development is a normal human difference to be respected as any other difference. So, whereas it used to be anything that was kind of presented away from this really narrow sort of uh, kind of confine of what is normal. I don't know what normal is. Who knows what normal is? And if I do know, I don't want to be it. Um, Anything that was away from that really small kind of label was used to be a disability or a distortion, but neurodiversity is about the difference. And so there's groups of neurodiversity. The opposite of that is neurotypical, which I actually have a problem with too. The idea of neurotypical, because as far as I'm concerned, everybody's completely different. And when we get on to talk about autism, one of my big things with autism is if there's 200 people with autism, there's 200 different types of autism because, we're people, we're not machines. So that's what I think of as neurodiversity. So it could be autism, ADHD, dyspraxia, dyslexia, Tourette's, could be OCD, could be developmental coordination disorder, which, yeah, that's dyspraxia. It could be all of these different things. So that's what I think of as neurodiversity or neurodivergence. How about you, Pixie?
um from like a scientific standpoint, absolutely what you said is all brilliant. But from a more like colloquial, like easy to understand standpoint, or I used to work as a summer camp counselor. So how I would explain it to children is it's like a stream. Is that there's like a big stream that a lot of people fit into. A lot of people can swim in that stream. It works for them, and then sometimes people need smaller streams or their streams go in different directions. But it all ends up at the same place. You all end up like everybody ends up a human being. It's just
Yeah.
what channels does your mind take to get there?
Yeah, that's brilliant. I love that. Um, so, do you want to tell us about your experience with neurodiversity?
Yeah. So hi, I'm Pixie. Something that you guys don't, that I talk about kind of frequently is that I am autistic. I was diagnosed pretty late in life, but that's not uncommon for girls, because a lot of us just present as either pretty quick or clever, but quiet or overly. So it's there's a lot of like um, stereotypically positive feminine traits that are kind of amplified when a girl has autism, so a lot of us don't get diagnosed when we're young, like boys do. Um,
But also, I think there's a bit of a
so
hangover of thought
yeah,
that, boys have autism. It's not something that girls have. And there's this like
yeah,
legacy of misinterpreted thought around that. So isn't
yeah.
necessarily, people aren't
Um,
necessarily looking for it like they might in with boys.
yes, I 100% agree. But yeah, I was diagnosed pretty late in life. I'm also dyslexic, so reading and math have always been pretty big struggles for me, and stuff like that. So um, yeah, that's kind of like my background in I guess neurodivergency, and also why I'm here.
So, how was there a point where you thought, hmm, is this my personality? These traits, these characteristics that I see in myself, is this just my personality, or is there something else happening? Was there a moment or a time when you or your family thought that?
Yeah. So talking to my mom in recent years, she's talked about how she's kind of always known that because she's actually got a degree in psychology and stuff like that. So she was aware from a very early age that I was not neurotypical by any sort of standards. Um, but she didn't think it was necessary to go get a diagnosis because I was doing fine.
Yeah,
Um, which is something that like she and I have differing opinions on, but it's like what's done is done, you know. Uh
in terms of
and so
diagnoses and labels.
yes, I think that it would have been really helpful for me to have a diagnosis in school. Because with the dyslexia and stuff like that, there were a lot of points where I was like, am I just like way stupider than all of the other kids? Like I don't understand why everybody else understands this and I don't. Um uh but yeah, I guess it was kind of there's a point when I hit high school where all of a sudden my like rote memorization tactic, because like to read and stuff like that, I just memorized what a lot of words look like. I read by shape rather than by letter.
Yeah. Oh,
So with the word because, that's hard for me to spell off the top of my head if I can't write it down because I've memorized the shapes of all the letters, not actually what they are or how they work. So if I were to
yeah.
spell anything out loud, it doesn't it's never ever correct. Um,
So the
and stuff
dyslexia,
like that.
did you know from quite a young age that that you have dyslexia?
Um, I not really. I knew it was harder for me to read. I knew it was harder for me to get like my math facts and like my times tables and stuff like that, but no one ever told me that was anything unusual. So I just thought I was like just learning how everybody else did because no one told me it was different.
And how did you find out that that might be something different? I mean, because with dyslexia, there's lots of other things, aren't there? That
Yeah.
can be to do with planning and to do with organisation and even to do with like rights and lefts, that sort of thing.
Yeah. So I have been I'm not I'm very smart, and that's a lot of why I flew under the radar for so long is because like some of that intelligence makes up for the gaps in like ways that my brain works. So I started university like when I was 16. I
Did
skipped the
you?
last 2 years of high school and just
Wow.
went straight to university. Um, and I went into university as a geochemistry major. And with geochemistry, there's a lot of like words that I had not learned ahead of time and stuff like that. And so there was a lot of new material that I had not had enough time to prepare myself to be able to interact with. That and it was going really fast. And so I was talking to some friends in study group, and I was like, I don't understand why everybody else seems to be getting this so fast. Like I clearly am smart enough to be here. I passed all these tests. I've qualified for this program. I placed and everything. But like, why am I falling so far behind? Um, and it was then that that a professor of mine was like, you should look into um, all this stuff. And so I went and I got tested and stuff like that. And it came back that I had very severe dyslexia. And they were like, this often goes hand in hand with autism. We recommend you see a psychiatrist and to see if that is an option for you and if there's avenues for that. And there was, and it was. And so I was like, oh, that makes so much sense. Suddenly, a lot of things that I just thought were like weird flukes for me make a ton of sense.
Yeah. That's really interesting. I've got a friend who I've actually known since I was about 7. I was at like junior school with her, and with with the same age, and we've got back in touch recently and haven't even seen each other for like 30 odd years. And she was always at school clever, but the naughty one. She was always naughty and all this sort of thing, and to the point where at the primary school they thought she might need to go to a special education sort of facility, even though academically she was doing really, really, really well. And since we've like reconnected, she has autism, and she was, that was the thing. And as soon as she was telling me about being diagnosed, it was like, oh, of course she does. And I mean, she's got like 4 degrees and 2 different masters and a PhD, and they were saying she wasn't bright enough to be in mainstream school and just couldn't cope with it. And as soon as that, just thinking about how you saying things made sense to you, that as soon as she got that diagnosis, it was like, all right, all of a sudden the world made sense to her, how she sees the world, how she manages the world, how people work with her, what she knows she needs to be able
Mhm.
to thrive, you know, and what she knows she can tolerate and what she can't, and what she just isn't interested in. And it just, the world seemed to just like click into place for her. what
Mhm.
what things did you what kind of traits did you think, that makes sense to me now, that makes sense? And also, just a second bit of that, what did you do to uh manage or support or work those traits out? No, not work them out, but
Yeah.
what did you put in place to mitigate them?
Yeah. I a lot of the way that I socialized suddenly made a lot of sense. I'd spent my whole life trying to make friends and getting very polarized mixed responses where some people either totally loved me and thought I was great, or like they could not stand me. They could not be around me. And it was always like kind of devastating when people like hated me because I didn't understand why. Um, and so that was one of the biggest things that made a lot of sense all of a sudden, is it was like, no, it's not because I'm just bad at making friends, or it's because I'm like just a really intense person. There's like reasons why this is so confusing and so hard. And then also just having that label and being able to submit that to like my ADA office at university and stuff like that has made it like I get extra test time, and I get, if I need to, I can have someone read my test to me, and stuff like that, and has made it super um, so much more accessible. And then also just having the language to like being able to go, because I'm a big learner, I love to learn, I'm very smart, and so I can learn. And so being able to like have the thing be like, this is what's going on in your brain, and then being able to go and do the research and understand more kind of intimately how the cogs are turning, um, was really really helpful to be able to then communicate what I would need better, um, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes total sense. And I've worked in lots of colleges, and with lots of people with all different neurodiverse neurodiversity, and also um, people with different disabilities as well. And we know there's like a crossover between what the language is for all of that. But my favourite thing would be, and it was really rare that it would happen, but it was brilliant when it did, that a student had come in and go, I've got ADHD, I've got autism, I've got da da da, and this is what I need. I'm entitled to, a separate room when I do my exam. I'm entitled to somebody sitting with me and reading it out to me. I'm entitled, and I loved that when somebody would just come in, absolutely self-advocating, and it was just so powerful, because it, to me, that absolutely reinforced the social model of disability, which we talked about
Mhm.
earlier. Um, did we talk about earlier? Was it on stream or was it off stream?
It was off stream.
Oh, was
We were
it?
talking about it before we
Yeah.
started. Yeah.
Sorry. So yeah, this idea that it isn't the person that's less, or the
Mhm.
person with the neurodivergence, or the disability, it isn't them that is in any sort of deficit. It's the culture and the world around them that is. You know, it's
Mhm.
the person is being disabled by the culture that they're in, by the, and it still drives me. I mean, it drives me mad. Even, and I know I'm a bit over the top with this because you know that's been my area for years and years. But when I see a toilet that says disabled toilet, it's like, well, toilet's not disabled. Just put accessible on. You know, what does that even mean? It means it's a toilet where anybody can go because it's accessible to all. You know, and
Mhm.
it's tiny little bits of language that, if I just think if they were tweaked just a little bit, would just open up the world. Like, you know, in job interviews and stuff like that, where you have to, do you need to disclose a disability? To me, disclose means, "Oh, shh, shh,
Mhm.
don't tell anyone," rather than share. Do you need to share? What? Because that's
Yeah.
about making their life and their time in that workplace accessible and inclusive.
Mhm.
What did you, when you found out that you did have, that you know there were reasons why you were feeling a certain way or behaving in a certain way? How did your life alter?
Um, that's a good question. I took myself more like before there I had been kind of stuck in this cycle of like shame is that I would do something and I
Yeah.
wouldn't go well and I would be like, wow, that's just because you're like you just didn't work hard enough, you didn't try hard enough, like you need to just like keep at it, and I would beat myself down and be like, you're not, like, what's wrong with you? Like, you, this should not be this difficult. You should just be able to figure it out. And so when I got the diagnosis and I realized, no, there's reasons why this isn't working for me, and doing the same thing over and over again is the definition of insanity. So why am I putting myself through this ridiculous ringer over and over again for something that like ultimately will never work for my brain?
Yeah.
Um, and just kind of being able to break those cycles of like shame and guilt and like that feeling of like, oh, it's not working out because you're a lazy person.
Oh,
um you're just
I
like you're
don't like it. I don't. Well, you know, the idea of
no.
that. I want to give you a massive hug. That there was any sort of shame involved with who you are.
A lot of it was a shame I put on myself.
Yeah.
Um, my mom was she's a psychiatrist. My dad was a federal lawyer. Like, I grew up in a very high achieving family. I grew up in a very high achieving household, and I was smart. And everybody told me my whole life, they're like, "Oh, you're so smart. You'll go far. You'll go far." And eventually, it stopped feeling like a compliment and started feeling like a prison sentence. In that I felt like I wasn't going as far as I was expected to, and I had all of these resources and all of these people at my disposal, and I wasn't getting as far as people had hoped or wanted from me, and it felt like I was letting them down.
And
But
is that where
then,
the shame came from? That you felt that you
yeah,
had this
and
privilege and you weren't taking advantage of it?
yeah, and so I enforced a lot of this like shame complex on myself, and then when I got the diagnosis, all of a sudden it was like the veil had been lifted, and I was like, oh no, I'm not lazy. I'm just like, this isn't the most effective way for me to do this. And so I spent a couple months in therapy, like learning how to interact with the world in a way that was better. And then also destigmatizing some accessibility things. Because there was stuff that I like didn't want to use because I felt like I wasn't like, I didn't have it bad enough to use it. And so, like that, and which is a crazy statement, like that's wild. um but so it's a lot of learning how, like, what things were available for me, and then like what tools and strategies I could use, and then also like unlearning some of that societal stigma
Yeah.
around some of the accessibility items and options.
Yeah. That's really interesting, the societal stigma. Can you give us an example of one of those things that you thought was, you know, almost kind of shameful to admit that it might help or it might
Yeah.
be important to you?
I would go through periods of time where I was like almost a shut in because crowds and like noise outside was too much. Like, it like sometimes, too much noise and like stimulation like that, it feels like it like hurts my skin. Um like which is funny, like another sensory thing, like this is so, my mom laughed when I told her about this, but another sensory thing for me is cotton balls. It always feels like cotton balls are screaming, and I hate the way that they feel. I hate the texture of them. And so when I got the diagnosis, my therapist was like, you could look into some like ear protection, some like sound, like mitigation tactics. And I thought that she meant like those big cans that people
Yeah.
wear. And I was like, I don't want to wear that in public. Like, how am I supposed to go to a fancy restaurant and like wear that? But the good news is it's the 21st century. So I found some really handy earplugs
Yeah.
that have little inserts so I can control how many decibels I'm blocking out at any given time. And they're so discreet, they just fit in my ears, and I can take the little inserts out and I can still hear people, but it eliminates background noise. And getting things like noise canceling headphones, um, Velcro, like elastic pants sometimes. Sometimes when I'm like having like a bad day or like it's the day is already a little bit too much, the idea of having to do pants with buttons or zippers is like horrific. So getting some like stylish elastic pants has been helpful. It's just silly things like that. Like and like the kind of water bottle that I use and the like kind of spoons that I have and stuff like that. Everything that I have in my space I've chosen to be as steady and accessible and consistent as possible.
Yeah. What you're saying about like the stuff you have at home. There's a brilliant wildlife presenter and expert and who has autism in the UK, and he does quite a lot of advocate stuff as well, and he's brilliant. It's called Chris Packham, and he made
Mhm.
this amazing. Sorry, Tom Simons. Shut up! Get rid of him. Um, he's on a bus somewhere in on the way to San Francisco. Um, yeah, it's Chris Packham. He said he doesn't have autism at home in his house. He doesn't have autism
Nope.
because everything in his house is for him as an individual. And I just thought that is the best thing ever. And it's that social model of disability that in his house, which is exactly for him, which is made for him, and all the different accessibility things within it. So he doesn't have this kind of thing that might otherwise need kind of managing because it's all right
Mhm.
for him. Um,
One of the one of the biggest things that I've learned, like, and that somebody told me that has like totally stuck with me is that like because I was raised with this very frugal attitude of like you get the cheapest option and you get the option that's like the most readily available and like if you have something you never replace it ever unless it's like totally destroyed, which is totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that mentality, except when I got my diagnosis I realized a lot of the things I have in my own home didn't work for me. Like there
right.
were a lot of textures that weren't good, there were a lot of things that made noise that I didn't like, and so just there was a period of time where I had to get over that like kind of like
Yeah.
very American, like I don't want to replace things, I'm spending too much, like da 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 da, to make my home accessible. But now everything in there is stuff that I like can handle and adore and is consistent and safe and works well for me. And I think that's like the biggest thing is just making sure that my home was like a home rather than another place that I had to like fight to be existing in.
Yeah. That's really interesting that, kind of it's kind of like making it your nest in it. It's your
Hmm.
nest and things in there are suitable for you. And yeah, that's really comforting as well, isn't it?
Hmm.
So if we just talk about autism in general, as I said before, my thoughts are if there's 200 people with autism, there's 200 different types of autism because it's so related to the individual. But there can be like general traits. So the three kind of big ones are the social communication and interaction. So reading faces, eye contact, reading tone of voice, expressions, gestures, that kind of thing. Sensory stuff. So what you've been talking about, the way things feel, and sometimes things being too loud, and sometimes, crowds being a lot. And the other one is kind of restricted and repetitive behaviours. So that might be finding unvarying having unvarying routines, that there's people
Yeah.
have a routine that they stick to and they're very happy with, and if it changes it can be difficult, or and kind of extreme narrow interests. Neither of those I think are a problem at all, because if you're really into something, you're really into something. Brilliant.
Yeah. Yeah. um I would say all those are fairly true. I say that like there's a way that the ways that some of those things manifest that are um sometimes not what people assume comes with autism. like with the social interaction thing, I'm what is described as hyperverbal. So I a lot of the one of the markers for autism in children is like they don't speak like until later in their developmental period. I spoke very, very early, and I like talk a lot. That's like a thing that I do. It's like sometimes it's almost like stimming, as I'm just like talking constantly. Um,
Would you just explain
and
stimming to us?
yeah, it's doing an action or adding or removing stimulus from an environment that I'm in. So if I'm in an environment that is like it's not stimulating enough, I might be moving, I might be making sounds, I might be messing with something, I might eat something to give myself some more stimulation. And if I'm in an environment with too much stimulation, so like large crowds or like a crowded restaurant, I might be removing stimulation, so I might go and take a break, or I might take some like a piece of clothing that's bothering me off, or I might put in some earplugs, just to like kind of even that out, because a lot of neurotypicals people's brains will just even that out for them, but sometimes I need to externally adjust things in order for it to be even in an environment that I can function effectively in.
And so, as far as kind of um, routines and that sort of thing, uh, let me just tell you, this is how I first found out about autism. And I knew the word, obviously I did. And I knew that some people have autism, that kind of thing. But when I started teaching, which was when Tom was really little, and I did a teaching course, so I did a teaching degree, so I could go out and do a couple of hours a week, and then and he was only little, and I just needed something apart from being at home, and I just loved it. But all of the teaching course, there was never anything about behaviour. There was never anything about neurodiversity. There was not anything about disability, about anything like that. And so I was learning about this kind of on the job when I got my first. Well, I went to do as part of it, you had to have a placement, and that it was at a time when it was a really like college that was full on. There was a lot of behaviour stuff. The police was there all the time, and because Nottingham at the time was very gangland kind of stuff, and so there were different gangs within the same college, so there was always something kicking off. And I was teaching this group, and it was a group of young men, because I was teaching English to young people who were doing sort of technical vocational stuff. So this group were builders. There were a group of young men, 16 to 19-year-old builders, who didn't particularly get on with the English and the maths at school. And so while they were focusing on the building stuff, they had to come and do kind of a basic functional English stuff with me. And there was this one lad in the class, and there was like 20 odd of them, and there was a lot of behaviour stuff happening anyway, because as I said, the gang stuff and the conflicts and that. But there was this one lad who he was really diligent. He was a bit of a tearaway, but he was really diligent, and he'd do his work and all of that. And then one session, I said to them, "Right, you've all done so much. We've got through everything that we're going to do. I'm dead pleased with you. You can go 15 minutes early. Go and have a longer break." And he was furious. He just started being really difficult. Really, his behaviour completely changed, and he was a little bit. I was just shocked, and
Mhm.
I thought, what has happened? I thought I'd given them and he was absolutely furious with me, and as it turned out, and I didn't know, that this young man had autism, and that was one of his big things, that he just couldn't understand why, if the class finishes at 1:30, we don't finish at 1:15. If it finishes at 1:30, we don't finish at 27 minutes past. That isn't the right thing. That isn't what happens. And for
Mhm.
me, that one experience with this young man um, just opened up this whole world of, hang on, autism. I don't know anything about autism. And, there's going to be loads of people that I teach who I could make their experience at college, I could make their experience better by understanding what I need to do for them to function more comfortably, and therefore do better work, and therefore get better grades, which makes me look good. if they're getting good grades. And so took my first like autism course, and it was just my first university course on autism stuff, and it was just like, oh, it just blew me away because it was at that point. I think it's much better now, but at that point, it was, it wasn't a secret. It was just nobody really mentioned it, and it's this huge part of people's can be a huge part of people's identity and the way they function and the way they how do you consider autism as to do with your identity? Is it part of it, or is it just sort of some of your behaviors and things you like and things you don't like?
That's a good question. Well, a lot of my so the way I experience anything like emotionally, and like the way that like I feel about things, I don't feel like that's in me. It always feels like there's like a person in me, and then like emotions and anything I feel about something is like weather. It's like whatever the weather is around her.
Hang on,
So
will you just explain that to me again, because I'm not quite understanding.
yeah, so like some people they feel emotions in the sense that they're like, I am sad, like I am a sad person right now. Um, but for me, it's less like I am sad and more like sadness is happening around me, like in my brain. So there's like a little person. I think of it this way: in my brain, there's a little person, and she's standing in the middle of a field, and whatever emotion I'm feeling is the weather in that field. It's not in me; it's happening around me, um, and that's how I kind of keep uh, myself from being kind of overwhelmed a lot because I have very big feelings. And so if I don't separate them from my person, then it's very easy for me to spiral into like very dark and bad places. So keeping it as like it's the weather around me rather than something that is me, that is part of me, helps me to manage that. So I would say like yes and no. It is definitely an identity that I hold and that I hold publicly because it's important to me for femme and AFAB people who are maybe looking around themselves and thinking like, oh, I'm insane, I'm going crazy, like this isn't normal, like I don't know what's wrong with me, to like see that hey, there is someone like you and you can succeed, which is why I claim it and I take it and I'm like, this
Yeah.
is part of who I am. Just because I want people to be able to see that and understand that like it's not like a life sentence, it's not something that's bad, it's not inherently negative, it's just a thing about you. But then at the same time, internally, a lot of the like stimulation things and stuff and sensory things like that is it just stuff is happening around me, and I just need to do what I can to take care of the girl in me. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does, and I love it. I love the idea of you being in the center and the like the weather around you, and it reminds me of that quote that I said to you we talked about earlier, that the human brain is more like an ecosystem than a machine,
Hmm.
and that
Hmm.
that kind of clicks in with that.
Yeah, I resonate with that ecosystem model a lot. A model I've been working on with my therapist, especially surrounding like neurodivergency and trauma, is the familial systems model, where like every version of you that has been and experienced a harm, it still lives in your head. And so sometimes your like trauma responses to things are because that person in your head is hurting again, not necessarily that you yourself are hurting, but that like echo of who was once hurt in you is upset. So I think that I really like the shift in thinking from the brain as like a machine to the brain as an ecosystem, because like just because a part of the ecosystem is unwell does not mean that the whole ecosystem is failing.
And that idea that you can kind of grieve for the person who experienced that
Yeah.
stuff, you can grieve for the person you were, you
Yeah.
know.
Well,
I find that quite powerful.
a lot of my like the things that I do to like help myself is taking care of all of the versions of me who did not get whatever help that they needed. So it's like retroactively going back and being like, hey, look, I understand that no one came for you. I understand that you didn't understand what was going on, but I promise you I get it now and we're going to fix this. And then retroactively working forward to heal the 8-year-old who was confused why no one liked her.
Yeah. That's really brilliant. I really love that idea. Um, for just for me, and this is not an autism or a neurodivergence thing at all. It's more of a when all the Me Too stuff came out. Um, that was very much uh, um, there was some things that I'd experienced that were just it was just like textbook Me Too stuff, and then like gaslighting afterwards. That was
Yeah.
that you know that you blame yourself for, that it's your. And one of my friends who I've been friends with since we were met at drama school, so we were 18 when we met, and he was on about an experience that I'd had, and just and can you remember when he rung up and said, da, 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 don't be saying that she did, da, da, da. And he was like, but that's exactly what happened. And is that what? I don't, and I was like retrospectively going back and going, yeah, it turns out everything wasn't my fault. It
Yeah.
turns out it wasn't my fault. It turns out
Yeah.
somebody shouldn't have been doing that thing, or somebody shouldn't have, been some sort of, been in a predatory way or whatever. But it was the 90s. It was the early 90s, and it was still very much like,
Hmm.
uh, well, misogynistic. Anything that
Yeah.
girls. And I mean, it still is now, but it was much, much worse. And sometimes I
Hmm.
think that there's a generational thing. It's quite hard for older women to, and I'm going way off topic here,
No, it's
for
okay.
older women
I
to
totally love this.
hear what happens to um, young women now and how they describe it, and understand that that is, and I don't want to go into anything specific, but understand that that behaviour that they've received is abuse.
Yeah.
Because sometimes I read the descriptions of abuse and I'm like, well, that was like a Tuesday for me. That wasn't abuse for me. And then I have to go, hang on, actually it was. But the way that we were kind of conditioned to think of it as our fault. What was I wearing? What did I say? How much had I had to drink? All of that, my fault, not the person who was perpetrating those abuses. And I struggle with it sometimes. I really do, and I know it's not popular. It's not a popular thing for me to say that. Sometimes I read the descriptions and I go, I don't get it. I don't get it. But that's to do with my conditioning when I was a younger person, and this like kind of being hardened to the idea of women as uh, the fault of the abuse. So I'm
Yeah.
really, really learning a lot, especially recently, about this whole area, and having to have a word with myself, and I'm
Yeah.
having the same conversations with women my age who are looking at what's considered abuse now and going, yeah, it is. It is. It's just that
Yeah.
we were in a position, we were told that all of that was our fault if anything happened like that. That's why I say, for us it was, some sort of description of abuse was, for us it was just a normal Tuesday, because it was a whole different thing. And it's up to us to catch up with that shit, up to the older
Yeah.
women to catch up with that shit and go, actually no, we were we shouldn't have took that. Nobody should have taken that sort of stuff. But it was the time. And I'm sure that older women of that generation, when I was in my early 20s and late teens, would have exactly the same conversation. The things that we were putting up with, or we were taking on as our fault. It's very much about what you wear, how much you had to drink, all of that. And they'd think we had it easy because when they were, 80, a 50-year-old when I was 19, would have
Hmm.
experienced far, far worse than we did because, patriarchy,
Yeah.
misogynism.
I think it's really interesting. My mom and I actually had a lot of conversations about that recently because over the summer I experienced what like anybody, even like her back then, would have considered to be like a harmful, dangerous situation. And so just the kind of the generational healing thing that we talked about.
Yeah.
My mom said that she was like, this is something that we've talked about more recently, is that watching me go through that and then go through like the medical system and then the legal system and then everything subsequent from that helped her heal from the things she didn't talk about.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's a thing that is so important right now, especially right now, is that people just like take a second and like I genuinely hope this for everybody here is that I really sincerely hope that you guys heal from the things that you don't speak of, from the things that may not even feel like it's a big deal,
Oh, I want to do a
and
little
like
cry.
this,
That was just so gorgeous. Such a good, a
uh,
beautiful thing to say to heal from the things you don't speak of. Oh God, that's beautiful and really, really sad and wonderful. Oh,
well,
you've
because
set me
everybody has
right
things that
off.
they don't know.
Oh, it was just a beautiful way of putting words together to have such an important meaning.
Well, because
Oh,
everybody has
Proton
things that
Pixie,
they don't.
you've set me right off. I'm having a little tear and everything. Oh, it's just lovely. That is just such a wonderful way of describing that. Sorry,
Well,
carry
'cause
on.
everyone has things that they don't talk about, whether or not
Yeah,
it's because they thought it was that big a deal, or whether or not because even if you don't think like this is especially true for like my mom's generation and like your generation is that there's a lot of things that you guys didn't think was a big deal when it happened,
yeah,
but even if you don't think it's a big deal, it still hurts. It still leaves that like mark. And so that's what I mean when I say I hope people heal of the things that they don't talk about. I hope people heal of that, and I hope people heal of the things they don't know how to talk about, or the hurts that they don't even know where it comes from. Because sometimes when it happens so much and you just get aggressed constantly and constantly, and it's always your fault, and there's never anywhere for it to go, and it's always on you. And how do you fix it? And even if you're doing anything right, it's still somehow on you. That hurts, that like tears people down, it whittles them away eventually, and it leaves big scars. And I hope that everybody, um, that that's a thing that people can heal from, and that that's a thing that people find relief in the younger generation, or in like a safe, soft, happily ever after for them, whatever that looks like. So that's really what I mean by that.
and I do think my generation does have a lot to learn from the younger generation. I mean, it's both ways, but I think there's an assumption that if you're older, you know better. And in some, shut up, it's Tom again. If you don't answer him straight away, he's like, "Where are you? What's going on? Ring me!" But newsflash, Tom Simons, I've got a life. Anyway, that was a gear change, wasn't it?
That's so funny.
um,
You're like, Tom, I'm actually hanging out with my favorite, who I love more than you, Proton
yeah.
Pixie.
So shove it, Tom Simons. Um, what was it? I forgot what I was on about now. It was very profound as well, and I've forgotten. Yeah, there's an idea that older people are always the imparters of knowledge and wisdom, and younger people are always the receivers of it, and that's just not the case at all. It's I just feel that where there's learning to be had, get that learning, take that learning, absorb it, and the age and the stage of life is almost irrelevant.
Hmm.
And yeah, and I love that. She's called Kathy Burke. She's an actress, a UK actress, and she's brilliant. And she's very, very kind of. She speaks up about stuff, and she was on about woke being used as an insult, and I can't remember the quote, but it's brilliant. And she's saying, yeah, I'm awake. I'm awake to what's going on. I'm awake to what's, if I'm having empathy and understanding that there is a different set of experiences than just mine, how is that an insult? How is it an insult? And she says it far more articulately than that. But it's just like this. I was just thinking about these words because I was going to go on to words and what's okay to say in disability and neurodiversity. But these words, which are always chucked at these younger generations, woke and snowflake, boring. And the idea that woke has turned into an insult when
It, yeah, it makes me so sad that it has, because it doesn't hurt us. at all. It only is a display, in my opinion, of pain from the people using it. Because if, like,
Well, you're a nicer
to
person
be
than me because
so,
I think it's a display of stupidity, a display of
yeah,
ignorance.
to be
How dare you be awake to what's happening in the world? You know, what an awful person you must be if you're awake to the situation.
yeah.
How's that
Well,
an insult?
and to be so upset that people are aware of the things that are struggles for other people tells me that no one was aware of theirs, and
Yeah.
that, like, it reads like a jealousy thing. And so, like, I am truly so sorry to anyone who felt so unseen and unheard that woke is an insult to them.
I
uh,
bloody love that. Oh, yo, I might write a Pixie Proton Pixie quote book because you're coming out with all sorts of gems, babes. You really are. These are
oh, I
brilliant.
love
I
you,
love
I love
that.
you
What
so
a
much.
lovely way to kind of see the world, and yeah, I'm learning a lot from you. Um,
I got to assume that people are either coming from a place of good intent, or they're coming from a place of, like, long-standing hurt.
yeah, yeah. As far as disability and that whole area, disability, neurodiversity, all of that. I'm quite, I've said I'm interested in the language of all of that
Mhm.
and what's okay to say, because even there's even sort of ideas that autistic is very different to a person with autism, and I might be wrong, but I do. But from what I've experienced in America, I think they're a little bit. I think you're a little bit behind on the whole language idea to do with inclusion, just by the way that handicapped spaces. What? Over here, that would be something that you absolutely wouldn't say. You wouldn't describe somebody as handicapped. You know, even if we're talking like car parking spaces, and it just jars with me, and because it's I think I do feel that in the UK, in a lot of areas, the language is changing for the better. Um,
Mhm.
what's your take on like the language of disability and accessibility and inclusion?
That's a good question, and I feel bad because I don't, like, I'm not, like, there's definitely things that we don't say. Like, there are definitely slurs for autistic people that we just don't use. Um, but like, it's interesting because, like, I wouldn't consider autism to be a disability. Um, I would just consider it to be a difference of ability and method. Which is, like, hard because then you have people who have physical disabilities, which actually does disable them from doing certain things. Um, and so I have, I'm not sure. I feel like a lot of the disability narrative, especially around, like, neurological disability, is interesting because I have met people who were completely nonverbal, who could not and would not speak, who were absolutely brilliant, some of the funniest, kindest people I've ever met. And then I've met people who were supposedly entirely neurotypical, who were the densest and, like, the most difficult to get along with and understand. Um, and so I think that the idea that because someone's brain is wired in a different way that immediately makes them disabled or more abled or whatever, um, is kind of silly and outdated in and of itself. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. Um, I also have a bit of a problem with the word disability being a bad word,
Yeah.
a negative word. And I know that there's this big crossover between neurodivergence and disability, and some people
Mhm.
have sort of more on one side of it, some people are more on the other, and some people have both. Um, but I don't really like the idea of the word disabled, disability being almost like anything lesser, anything less.
Yeah.
Being because to me it's just a description of inclusion needs, and that's the phrase that I tend to use more than even even neurodiversity or neurodivergence or disabilities. Inclusion needs, it's somebody with specific inclusion needs, which just means things need to be put in place for them to have about
Yeah,
equity, about having the same experience as somebody who doesn't have any specific inclusion needs, you know. Um,
the way I talk to people who've never run up against that is I'm like, it don't think inclusion needs, think boundaries. The boundary for like me going to do something is that like I like need it to be quieter than it is. But if it's a thing that like the external thing can't control, then like I will deal with that myself. I will enforce that boundary for myself and wear earplugs or whatever. And so I think that like that neurotypical people are accommodated and included all the time. And so it's just when those inclusion needs, like you said, and those accommodations and those boundaries are different to what is mainstream, then people tend to get upset. When like you'll have like a neurotypical person who's like, oh, like I can't meet at this time because I have to like go to the gym or I like get upset in my brain. Like that's an inclusion need that you need. You need the time to be this so you can do this so that you can continue to function. And I think that that failure to understand that like people are accommodated, even if you're not autistic, even if you don't have ADHD or dyslexia or whatever, that you are accommodated all the time. Um, and so when other people who might have different needs that look different from the outside are asking for accommodation with that, that they're not asking for something totally new and revolutionary. They're just asking for something that everybody else already gets.
yeah, that difference between equity and equality.
Yeah.
Equality being everybody gets the same,
Hmm.
and equity being everybody gets what's specific to them to have the equal outcome. So it's always that
Hmm.
idea of, you know, people looking over a fence. And if
Yeah.
some people can, if somebody's 6'3", they can look over that fence. If somebody's 5'2", they can't look out over that 6 foot fence. So the 5'2" person would need a box to stand on to have the same experience as the person who's 6'2".
Hmm.
And it's that equity, everybody having like what they're being able to have their needs met in that individual way. um
Hmm.
do you think we should have a look, see if there's any questions or any topics that people might want to,
Yeah.
if we just do about another
Sure.
20 minutes of that, if that's okay?
Yeah. That's totally fine. Chat, I am looking at you guys now, and if you want to ask questions or say something, now is the time. 'Cause I will be your voice.
Thank you. Because you know what I'm like, I'll probably just turn everything off and get it all wrong, and I'll have booked a plane ticket or bought a dress by accident. Hey, I did that in the middle of the night last night. We not bought a plane ticket. I bought a dress though, a really nice one, and then I woke up and I was like, "Oh my god, I've just spent £100 on a dress at 3 o'clock in the morning." Because it was our Tom's show, wasn't it? It was our Tom's first night, and where
Mhm.
you were at the first night of the tour. And I knew he'd ring me before the show, and I knew he'd ring me when I've come off stage, and so that was like 4 o'clock in the morning for me. So I
Mhm.
spent the whole night like that, hoping it had
Mhm.
gone well, hoping everybody was happy, hoping, everything had gone to plan. And because I was wide awake, I had my phone out, and I saw on the Facebook this branded Zuri, they're called the Beautiful. They're like Kenyan organic cotton prints. Beautiful. I thought, oh, I'll have one of them. Then this morning I woke up like that. What have I done? I kind of thought,
That's so
what?
funny.
Are there any
Um,
questions before I start
yeah.
telling you my entire life story? Look, the dogs are here. Can you see them?
Ah,
There's
hi
Walter.
puppies.
And there's Betster down there. Although she's not in my good books because
Oh.
she did bite me this week.
Um, okay, someone says, Mrs. Simons, what did you do to help the student who needed a rigid routine at college? And that's from Ace Tall. Okay, having the dyslexic person read the usernames might have been the worst idea, so I'm so
Sorry.
sorry if I mispronounce your name.
Sorry. Um,
No, it's fine. You're fine. I'm just
um,
apologizing to the people whose names I'm about to butcher.
um, I'll listen to him, and made sure that I learned about autism. I found out where I could do a university course on autism, and I did that straight away because I realised I was absolutely lacking in knowledge, in understanding, in empathy around that whole area. And it wasn't and my colleagues thought I was mental because I would just, go and I'd pay to go and do a course, and they kind of, what are you doing? But I just thought I'm just missing out on this whole idea. But also, because I was also a bit later on, I was writing for the Times educational supplement every week, and I was writing a column about my journey into education and all of this. So I wrote one column out of the blooming hundreds and hundreds that I wrote that I massively regret because I was out of order and I didn't know at the time. And it got a lot of pushback, and a lot, people were quite cross. And it was about somebody in the class, in my group. This is a couple of years later at a different group, who wouldn't ever take his coat off. And it was a mainstream group. It wasn't like a specialist group, but there was this young man, and he would just absolutely refuse to take his coat off. And we were, as teachers, we were told again and again, you are preparing these people, you are preparing these young people for work. So if they're exhibiting behaviours that won't wash in the workplace, that won't wash if they go to an interview, then we need to help them sort these behaviours out. So, and I wrote this column about this, insisting that this young man take his coat off, because that was, otherwise I wasn't preparing him for work. And I knew he had autism, and I knew he was in mainstream, but he had autism. And it was like, well, yeah, I know that your coat gives you a lot of comfort and everything, but how can I look at myself as a teacher if I'm letting you think that in red hot summer you've got a massive duffel coat on is acceptable behaviour to go and use in the workplace, because it isn't. Now I think, and people were quite cross about the column, and now I think, I'm not surprised. That was the opposite of inclusive. If he wanted to keep his coat on, keep your coat on. If that was the thing that made you feel safe and secure and kind of part of being able to function in that environment, keep your coat on. If somebody wants to hire you because you're brilliant, because you're really good at your job, they won't give a shit if you have your coat on or not. They just won't. And I
Yep.
really regret that column, but it was one of those things that really got me even further into looking at inclusion and disability and neurodiversity and all of that.
Hmm. Um, Sarah Sims says, I would love to hear about being autistic in American culture. It's so different to the UK, so I'm very curious.
Ooh,
Ooh,
yeah, that is a brilliant question.
um, so I would say it's definitely very stigmatized still. There is this idea of what an autistic person looks like, to the point where, like, I've told people, like, in my life who've known me for years that, like, oh, I got my autism diagnosis, and they're all like, oh, you're not autistic, like, you don't, you talk just fine, and you're so normal, and you look normal, and I'm like, great, thanks. So there's this idea, and I would say in a lot of mainstream American culture, that autistic people are the like worst case scenario of how autism can possibly manifest, where they're belligerent, they're nonverbal, they're hard to work with, they're hard to understand, they don't speak right, they're not intelligent when really that's not even approaching true, uh, ever. But so I would say that like there's definitely a lot of that, which is not only harmful for people who do not fit into that stereotype, but it's also harmful for the people who do, because there's nothing wrong with that either. Um, so I definitely think that there's definitely some negative feelings and stereotypes associated with it. It's like that thing where you're um, like I do this with my friends sometimes, where I'll be like, oh, I like I'm fat or whatever, because I am. I'm not a small person. But then they're like, no, you're not. You're so gorgeous. And I'm like, okay, hold on. I never said I wasn't
Yeah,
absolutely
yeah,
stunning.
yeah, yeah,
I just said I was fat. There's a difference.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
and
I'm
stuff
just the
like that.
same. Yeah, I'm a big fat
So
fox.
no, and actually, like, your content has helped me a lot with that. In that, like, that I never said I wasn't like totally stunning. I just said that like this one thing, especially with the PCOS stuff. Okay, chat. If you ever even suspect that you have PCOS, please talk to your doctor before you let them put you on an estrogen-based birth control. I'm actually begging you, do not make the same mistake that I did.
That's polycystic.
A polycystic
Cystic
ovarian
ovarian.
syndrome.
Yeah, yeah. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
So,
The idea
um,
is what you're talking about. labels and stuff. The idea of fat being an insult, I just don't accept it. You know, it's just a description of how I am. It's a
Yeah.
description of how I am. You know, if somebody else wants
It's
to take it as an insult, it's entirely up to them. It's got nothing to do with me.
yeah.
You know.
It's just autism is the same way.
Yeah.
Saying autistic does not negate all of the good things about me. It does not erase all of those. It helps explain some of the behaviors that I'm less than fond of. Um, but it also doesn't mean that I'm like a bad person or I'm a stupid person or I can't socially interact and stuff like that. Um, so I would say that that's a big thing in American culture is we're very like one or the other. We're very two party system both in politics and in mentality in that like things cannot coexist for a lot of people. Um, so
Do you know what I have to? And trying to hold back on this front because I can do like 3 hours of rage on it, and it's that I can't remember his name, and I think I blocked it out. That absolute arsehole idiot doctor who wrote a research piece that has been um, debunked time and
oh
time and time again that the
yeah.
MMR jab uh, gave autism to children, you know, and it's where really the whole anti-vax thing came about. And because of this one thing he did, which has been completely discredited, the research was kind of the sample size wasn't big enough. There was the that he was financed by people who had an interest, but because it was wrongly printed in a well-respected medical journal, it was clung on to and turned into this massive thing, which has turned into like the anti-vax movement. And first of all, this absolute arsehole who did not know what he was doing is like, for me, he's one of the most dangerous people that's ever existed, because the
Mhm,
result of that has been measles outbreaks killing children, you know, because
mhm,
people have believed that you can't that was right, you know, this conspiracy theory of this one idiot doctor who's not been discredited, he's been barred, he's not a doctor anymore. um
mhm.
but also the other thing was, since when is autism the worst thing in the world? If would you rather get this jab, even if his research was accurate, which it isn't? um it's like the choice between having this jab that'll stop your child getting measles, mumps and rubella, and possibly dying, you know, children die from measles, you know, or the
Mhm.
potential for them to have autism.
I
How does that
this is
make
also
it just try? Oh,
this is also an intense take, and so I'm sorry in advance, even though I'm not actually that sorry. Is that if you're someone who's like a prospective parent, and your child having autism or a developmental disorder or coming out possibly differently abled than you is like enough to change how you love and care for your child, you should not be a parent. Like if that's enough to change your mind on this whole living person who it is your entire job to protect and to take care of and to raise and defend and love and support, if that is enough to change your mind on that, don't have kids.
it's that idea that the you know, as I say, it's completely discredited, but the choice was either having this jab that would, you know, potentially save your child's life, or
Hmm.
the risk, the potential for your child to have autism,
Hmm.
which, you know, I just, it's, oh god, yeah, as I say, we should
And
maybe move on, because I can do 12 hours on how much I hate that bloke and how he's started a you know, a sense of
yeah,
false activism that just puts people in danger and kills people, you know, because that's
Anna
really
in
where
the
the
chat.
anti-vax thing all over kind of came from, that thing. Are there any more?
Lauren asks, yeah. Lauren asks, what are your opinions on people calling other people autistic as an insult, regardless of whether or not they are actually autistic?
What do you think about that?
Um, I it's one of those things. There's been a lot of discourse on like the internet about like insulting terms and who can reclaim them and who can't. And I think with stuff like autism, it's kind of hard to be able to tell who can reclaim it and who can't, because people are called like the R word a lot, even if there's nothing actually like that would have
Are
gotten
they?
them medically labeled as that. Um,
I think
Oh,
that
I
they
got
are.
called it all the time in school.
Did you?
Yeah, all the
Yeah.
time. I also got called the F slur. Yeah, there's like a lot. I was not. Guys, I'm not actually that cool.
Oh, you are. You are that cool.
but
It's
there's
yeah. I
there's
just
a
don't.
lot of discourse on that.
I think that I'm certainly in that kind of bubble where that kind of language just isn't around me, but I know it exists.
Hmm. There's a lot of discourse on whether or not people can use it, and I think it's one of those things that it's like up to the person's discretion. I do not take offense to being called autistic. I don't even take offense to being called the F word or the R word. I don't think that's mean, because I don't like, it's one of those things that it's like, it's not, if I don't think it's mean, then your insult doesn't work. Just like I don't think it's mean
Yeah.
if someone was like, "Hey Pixie, you're so fat." Like, okay, great, cool, cool. So excited that you like.
Yeah.
Well done,
Thanks.
Sherlock. That's
Thanks for your
incredible.
input. Yeah. Thanks for your input. Jog on.
Incredible
Yeah.
observation. Um, but like stuff like that. So it's just one of those things that like I personally, but I'm also not like the end all be all authority on autism. So, um, but honestly, like if it's in, I don't know. Like I definitely will make fun of my friends and be like, "Wow, like you're acting so autistic right now," to like make fun of them. But also, I feel like I can say that because I've had people say it to me with genuine intent for harm. But
I think it's interesting that whole idea of autistic as a as an insult, because I wonder how. I think there can be kind of a misplaced idea of that you're helping that person. They're a little bit autistic. What I think maybe that people could be saying is that they have these certain traits which fit in with autism. But that doesn't make autism any less, and it doesn't make autism
I
an
don't.
insult. And I don't know if sometimes
Yeah,
it's kind of a, a description of somebody's behaviours rather than an insult, but it comes across as an insult.
I think it's one of those things where it's like for people like autistic is one of the worst things that you could be for uneducated people who don't get it. And so I think that's why it comes across as an insult to people, which I think is very silly because there's nothing wrong with it and it doesn't actually change that much about a person.
Yeah, yeah. It's I don't know. I don't think I've, as I say, I know that I'm in a position of privilege where I don't have that language, and on social media, and I know social media can be an awful, awful place. But I'm also like, if somebody's horrible and they're saying that sort of stuff, off you go, blocked. Don't want to see you, because I wouldn't want to see you in real life
Oh,
chatting about stuff. So I'm very much like, no,
yeah.
next. Not interested in your narrative. Fuck off. Go and peddle your hate
Saffron.
somewhere else.
Saffron Louisa in chat just asked a really interesting question. That was, do you have any advice for someone who's waiting for an autism diagnosis but is worried they won't qualify for one? Because without the diagnosis, it would be hard to explain their needs without the aid of being able to say, I am autistic.
Oh, that is interesting. What do you think? This is your lived experience, isn't it?
Okay, as an AFAB and femme presenting person, I can say that I am very lucky to have received an autism diagnosis. I'm very lucky to be able to have that on my chart and have that box ticked. That is 100% a privilege. The other thing is that being able to afford the testing, being able to afford the doctors, to be able to get that done is in fact a privilege. So any sort of mental health diagnosis in the U.S. is inherent. There is classism involved in getting that.
Yeah.
Poor people cannot afford it a lot of the time. Um, and especially if you see maybe the wrong psychiatrist for you the first time and then you have to try another one, sometimes people cannot afford to try again. And so my advice for you is that there is so much information and so much lived experience of people with autism that like saying you're autistic is not exclusive to people who just have that diagnosis. If it helps you to explain your needs, because everybody in the whole world, I do not care who you are, I do not care what you do, I don't care how you talk, deserves to be accommodated and exist in the world in a way that is effective and safe and comfortable for themselves. And so if saying, hey, I have autism, gets you the accommodation that you need, gets you the support that you need, and gets people to understand what you're going through, if saying that gets you there, say it. even if you don't have the diagnosis, because especially in America, there's so much class and race and geographical location and gender that ties into the ability to get that diagnosis. Um, it's like that's one of those things that I am like, I think self-diagnosing is okay in this case, especially because there's such a wealth of information. And so you can listen to someone like me who's like, I have a confirmed diagnosis, I've gotten that, here's all the ways that I've noticed it in myself, and you're like, hey, that sounds a lot like me. I have no problem with you taking that and being like, hey, I have autistic tendencies, this is what I need. So that's my advice for it. Is just say say it. I have autism, or I have autistic tendencies. This is what I need. This is what I need from you. Um, and then just going from there, because you deserve to be comfortable in the world that you live in. You deserve to be safe in the world that you live in, and your brain deserves a place where it functions the best it can.
Woo! Oh, you're just on. Oh, you're brilliant. She's absolutely on fire. Some of this stuff you just need to write speeches of, because it's just brilliant. It's absolutely getting to me what you're saying. It's just wonderful. Are there any other questions? Should we have one
Yeah.
more, or things to
Um,
discuss?
Someone asked. I have one about the double standard when it comes to harassment, and I have one about neurodivergent schools.
Okay, should we do both? Have you got time to do another?
Okay. I've got time to do two.
Cool.
Wolf in Nature says, what's your opinion on the double standard for harassment? My male presenting friend was told to man up when a woman harassed him.
Yeah, I think it's really difficult, really, really difficult, and that whole gendered language, man up, is, for me, it's redundant. When you say man up, what do you mean? You're talking about the things that we would also call like toxic masculinity. So it's
Mm-hmm.
an outdated, redundant uh, kind of idea for somebody to man up. Man up, every woman's different, every man's different, every person's different. So when we're talking about gender being a certain thing, I just don't think it's relevant. Because
Mm-hmm.
there's everybody's individual. Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I do think that it's absolutely real, and it's also the idea that men are there is a double standard of abuse, and there's
Mm-hmm.
also, I would imagine, like an idea of an element of shame around being a man, with all this, like, all the stuff that the patriarchy tells you should be, and all this ideas of what masculinity is, to suggest that you were abused by somebody else, or by a female, kind of undermines all those ideas of what you told. All these, like,
Mm-hmm.
actually quite undermining toxic ideas of what masculinity is. Big, strong, don't show weakness, don't show emotion, don't show. That's bonkers. All of that is completely bonkers. Just, the main thing I would just say is to keep safe, and make sure that
Mm-hmm.
other people know about this. And if you're at risk, make sure you're having a conversation with somebody outside of that relationship um, to feel safe, whether regardless of the gender. What do you think?
I think I agree with absolutely everything that you said. I think that's all true. I would also like to add on is that it's really devastating to me to see how a lot of the abuse that is suffered by men is used to discredit women. Which I think is very interesting, and I think that does everybody a disservice, because a lot, like, kind of like one of the like number one things that I see from people is that, like, oh, like a woman will talk about her experience being abused, being hurt, being harassed, and then someone will come in and be like, we'll use a story. They'll be like, yeah, but we did it to men, and that's the time we talk about it, is when we're like trying to like discredit women talking about their experiences with a man's
Yeah,
experience, and that's the only time that he gets mentioned. And I think that's bullshit. I think it discredits, but I think it dehumanizes both the woman involved. I think it dehumanizes the man. I think that there needs to be a space where everyone, regardless of gender identity, regardless of gender expression, regardless of sexuality, can discuss this without it invalidating another person. Because my experience is valid and this man's experience is valid, and they do not cancel each other out. They do not negate each other, and they should not be put in competition. And so I think that's a huge thing that the double standard does, is it weaponizes men's pain, men's trauma, men's hurt to tear down women and make that worse for them. But it also totally dehumanizes the man in the situation. He was still harmed.
Yeah.
His experience should be discussed in a space that is safe for him, in a space that is a place for him to receive support and care from the community, in a place that's healing, not only talked about when we need to shut her up, because that helps neither of them. And I think that that's a thing that happens over and over and over again in our society, and it's a damn shame.
Yeah, absolutely. Put brilliantly. What was the other? What was that other question?
It's just thoughts on schools designed for neurodivergency.
Schools. I'd be interested to know a bit more about that question. Are we talking, mainstream schools? Are we talking about the actual design of the
I think
schools? Or are we talking about the way
specialty
that,
schools.
or the way that schools are organised? As in, you're all 12, you're all in this group, you all do the same thing, And if we're talking about that, the way that schools are structured, certainly in the UK, that it's just by age and nothing else, and and I know that is not particularly helpful, assuming that everybody's at the same level for the same age. However, until an alternative, and it's something I've discussed a lot actually, that whole idea doesn't necessarily work. But what's the alternative? To get this massive swathe of young people, of children and young people coming into education, getting the education that they need, and moving off into a direction that is right for them. How
Mhm.
else do you manage this massive cohort of people to give them the things that, give them basics and the things that they need? And while I absolutely agree that it's not an ideal way of doing it, I don't know what a viable alternative to educate everybody from the age of like 3 or 4 would be.
So I have an experience in early childhood education. I was a summer camp counselor, and I worked in after school programs. And an after school program that I worked at that I really liked is that the first week we had people commit to, like, your kid's coming for a year. They're going to be with us for a year. They're going to be with us every day after school for the whole school year. And what we did in the first week is we didn't give them assignments, but we gave them tasks that were designed to figure out how they learned. And then we grouped them, regardless of age, into groups based off of their primary learning styles and also their competency within that learning style. So we had like different benchmarks. If they could do, like, when we didn't tell them how to do the task, we are just like, do this, get to point A from point B. But if they hit these different benchmarks that students repeatedly hit, that's how we grouped them. And I noticed that that was really effective in fostering community within the students, because they were with peers who got it the way that they got it, so that they could adequately learn how to communicate, like, this is what's working for me, what's working for you. And then also I think it helped them because we were able to tailor lesson plans to the way that they learn. So if we had tactile learners who were maybe a little bit lower on the verbal scale, then like having things that they could touch and hold that would relate to the lessons made it so much more helpful. And all of those students did better on standardized tests in our program than students who were not in our program. And we had everybody from like special needs children to like top students.
That it's what you're saying is it sounds brilliant. It's massively controversial within UK teacher stuff and has been for ages. The VAC system, the visual, auditory, kinesthetic, read write. So is that what you mean? Those four kind of,
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
because the idea of that, which makes real sense, but it got to the point over here because education stuff can get so intense and everybody follows this fad, and then everybody moves into entrepreneurship. That's the next thing. We all have to be entrepreneurs, and then it's whatever. It can be so. What was the other one that we're on about all the time? Blooming mindsets. Yeah, I know. Carol Dweck mindset. It makes a difference. All of that, but nothing. It doesn't have to be absolutely exclusively that. There can be a load of different ideas put together. And I think over here there was the idea that the whole VAC, visual, auditory, kinesthetic, read write styles of learning styles it got so intense that some areas of education were going, this is how this person learns, therefore they will do that for the rest of their lives. And it kind of, there was a lot of research kind of came out of that kind of discredited the whole single trackness of it. And I absolutely agree. And it wasn't kind of discrediting the whole thing at all. It was saying that in some areas, some people learn better in this specific way. But if they're learning something else, learning a different subject, they might learn. It was just highlighting the flexibility of learning styles. Because I think it just got so polarized over here. And I do think it's a brilliant way to kind of to work out how, work out what works. But in the system of in the state school system over here, where there's 30-40 kids to one teacher, it's not, I don't know how that would be viable.
Yeah, we were very lucky because it was an after school program, and so it was a lot of like college students who were available, so we could divide groups up into like four to six per instructor, especially because it was an optional thing, so people could opt in.
And I think in that context, it would have been brilliant because you'd have chance to develop those relationships with the individual children as well. And really
then the other thing is that, like, based off of how they did in the task week, that's how we would present information to them first. But if they still weren't getting it, we would try all of the other routes.
Yeah.
Because like maybe someone's tactile for math, but like needs to have science explained verbally or whatever, and like that's fine. But I think we were very lucky. We had the resources to do it, and we had the people, the manpower for it.
Yeah, I think it just over here is it just got so polarized. It got so kind of confined.
I think a lot of it boils down to children need to be able to make meaningful relationships with the people who they're learning under, and I think in these super huge class sizes, that's not feasible.
Yeah. Well, we've done, and coming up an hour and a half. You've been absolutely brilliant. I can't wait to watch this back and write things down that you've said, because I've learned so much from you. You were absolutely brilliant. Such like profound, interesting, new ways of for me to understand stuff that you've taught me this evening, and I'm really, really grateful. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. I absolutely adore you. I love you to bits. And so this was
you too. Thank you.
So lovely.
And thank you to everybody who's watched and who's been involved. And I'm so sorry that I haven't quite got the hang of the chat and all the rest of it yet. My husband's back in another week and he'll show me how to do it, because he understands all that all that tech stuff. But I believe that this week's audio has worked.
I think we fixed it.
I know, you fixed it. You showed me what to do. Oh, she's been teaching me left, right, and centre.
Manifold and James Marriott for that. That's so funny.
You what, babes?
I said I can't believe I beat out Jack Manifold and James Marriott to fix the audio first.
Yeah. They were rubbish. Didn't help me one bit. That's not true. They did. They were both brilliant. But still, not as much as Proton Pixie. So, James Marriott.
Can I very quickly say that I have had the best 2 days of like interacting with the entire Simons family. I met Tom and his dad yesterday at the show, which I went and saw yesterday. Thank you so much. Shout out to him for the invite. But that's so funny. And not to plug your kid's show, but it's hilarious. It's truly the funniest ever. So if you can go, you should go, guys. You should really go.
And I hear there's discussion about my vagina on it. There's discussion about my vagina in the show, which is just brilliant to wake up to and have somebody send me that little clip and to just see like 1,000, 2,000 people in a room all visualizing my vagina. So there we are. Thanks, everyone.
They made you very fearsome.
So they bloody should. And anyway, he had a C-section, so it wasn't even involved. So everybody can shut up. Have I gone into the too much information
no, that's
area?
Just so funny. It's just so funny.
And he was 2 weeks late, and I was 3 days in labour, and then I just had to have an emergency C-section. So, thanks a lot, Tom. All right, then. I know. Woo for Tom Simons. All right then, babes. Thanks so much. I really appreciate it, and I really appreciate all the mods and everybody who's really helped out with this. You're lovely, and thank you so much for allowing me to do this. And I'll see you soon, babes. Bye
Bye.
bye.